This is Marketing Jam, a show featuring the brightest minds in marketing. Marketing Jam is brought to you by Cyber Impact, the email marketing platform made specifically for Canadian small businesses. Go to cyberimpact.com/jelly, create a free account, and start sending CASL-compliant promotional emails in just a few clicks.
All right, I want to welcome everyone to the latest edition of Marketing Jam. I'm really excited because we're talking to probably one of the most important people on the internet in Canada today. This is Spencer from CIRA. If you don't know what CIRA is yet, Spencer will explain, and he'll explain how he controls the Canadian internet space, or something like that. So, Spencer, for those that don't know what CIRA is or what that acronym stands for, why don't you explain to our listeners and viewers to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. So I work for CIRA, or lesserly known as the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. We're basically the nonprofit organization that runs the .ca domain on behalf of Canada. So actually, a lot of people don't really know us all that well. They know .ca, but they don't necessarily know the organization behind it. So yeah, it's a really cool place to work, and we're doing some fun stuff.
So if I went to back in the day, register.com or GoDaddy today, and I go to register.ca and ask me a few extra questions to verify that I am a Canadian business, is that you collecting that information and data?
Yeah, so at CIRA, we enforce something that we call the Canadian presence requirement. Essentially, what it means is you have to either be a Canadian business, or do business in Canada, actually have a physical presence in Canada in order to register a .ca domain. And we have a compliance department that makes sure that, for example, people from California don't try to register .cas, because you'd be surprised how many Californians think that that domain is for them. So yeah, we do audit that information and make sure that the .ca domain name stays exclusively for Canadians.
That's awesome. And so if I was to register or want to register .ca, can I go right to CIRA and register it directly instead of through GoDaddy and all the others?
No, actually, so we don't actually do registrations ourselves. You could consider us more like a wholesaler, or we're almost like, if you think about it in a manufacturing terms, we build the CAs to a certain extent. Okay. And then we have a channel that we sell the CAs through, which would be your GoDaddies or your Rebels or your Web Hosting Canada. They would be the registrars that would sell our product. It's similar to how you can't buy a Coke from Coke, right? You pretty much always buy a Coke from a retailer. You can't go to Coke. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe you can go to Coca-Cola's website and buy a Coke. I'm not sure, but generally speaking, we operate more as a kind of like a manufacturer in a weird kind of sense, and as a distributor, as a wholesaler almost.
That's really cool. And you're a nonprofit based in Ottawa, is that correct?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Ottawa. So essentially, we get our mandate to represent and support the .ca registry from the federal government. Actually provided us with our mandate way back about over 20 years ago, and now we operate that independently. We're a lot of people think we're a government department. We're not. We're a nonprofit organization that manages the .ca domain, and yeah, we're based in Ottawa, and it's we've actually got. I'm actually at my house right now, but we have a really sweet office in Ottawa. Beautiful office. It overlooks the Ottawa Red Blacks football field. So it's a pretty good place to work.
Awesome. So how does someone get to work at .ca at CIRA?
Wow. So I mean, I guess it depends on what you do, but I mean, the cool thing about CIRA is there's in a lot of ways it's a kind of like a hybrid of two organizations. On one side, we're this really cool tech organization. We have developers, we have network engineers, we have IT security people who help not only run and maintain the .ca registry and make sure that it's safe and secure, but also they're also developing new products and doing new innovations based off of some of the technologies that we build. But on the flip side, we're a nonprofit, so we actually have a lot of sort of responsibilities when it comes to internet governance. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with organizations like ICANN. We represent Canada on the international stage through organizations such as ICANN, where we talk about things like internet governance and different areas of jurisdiction. And essentially, CIRA acts almost like it's almost like a mini UN for the internet, and we act on behalf of Canada in some of those forums. Another part of our sort of nonprofit side is because we're a nonprofit, we like to give back to the Canadian internet community. So every year we run what we call our community investment program. And we basically give away about $1 million, a little over $1 million every year to nonprofit and institutional organizations that have really cool internet-based projects. So we actually just closed our recent round of submissions just a couple weeks ago. So we're in the process of deliberating on those, and essentially in a few weeks, probably more like a month or so, we'll be announcing the projects that we sponsor. So essentially those can be anything from university-based projects, they can be community nonprofits, they can be all kinds of different organizations that we basically give out grants from anywhere from 50,000 to maybe 100,000. I think this year we might be giving some larger amounts, essentially to help grow the internet in Canada and to provide better access and education for groups who may be marginalized or may not have the access that we would like. So we do a lot on the nonprofit side. So that's why CIRA is a really cool place to work, because that cool mix of the two. For me personally, I got here through communications and marketing. I've always been a big tech guy, and Ottawa is obviously a huge tech hub. But I really like
Shopify, right?
Yeah, I mean, Shopify is just down the street. They're great down there. Ottawa's a really awesome tech hub. I think it's the largest per capita tech hub in Canada. You think about the concentration of jobs, it's actually number one. And so what's really cool about it is that it's a really great environment where I can sort of, use my marketing and communication skills for a technology company, but also do some good, which is really cool, right? So, it's great. I've worked for e-commerce companies before. I've worked for other types of organizations before, but this is a really neat hybrid. So it's a good place to be.
Okay. You mentioned ICANN. Why don't you tell us what that stands for?
Well, ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So essentially, it is the international body that manages essentially domain names and the entire ecosystem of both TLDs and CCTLDs and GTLDs that essentially help the internet work. Essentially, it's almost like the address book of the internet that makes sure that when you're looking for something, you can find it. And ICANN acts as sort of a governing body to help make sure that all the different countries follow the same rules, have the same governance, and we work on different policy and advocacy things at ICANN.
Now, why do I want a .ca? Like, what's the point? Like, I know there's .coms, there's .cos are really popular right now, like .cos, but or .orgs if you're a charity. But why should I get a .ca? Why do I go to the point of doing that?
Well, when we talk about getting a .ca, really there's three main messages we usually hit on. One is a .ca is exclusively for Canadians, and so it's one of the few things, you think about what things are exclusive for Canadians, right? Your passport, Canadian money, even sort of yes, no, Canadian stamps, give or take. But domain names, .ca domain name is exclusively for Canadians. So essentially, it's the one thing that exclusively identifies you as Canadian online. The second thing that we talk about a lot is that we have all kinds of data, both research data that shows that Canadians prefer to do business, shop, interact with Canadian businesses. So essentially, when people see a .ca domain name, it's almost like a little Canadian flag hanging off the back of your business that essentially gives Canadians more confidence and more pride, quite honestly, in doing business with you. So it really does provide a sales and marketing lift for your organization. If your audience is either exclusively or majority Canadian, it provides you with a huge sales and marketing lift. And then the third reason is just because .ca gives back. You buy any of those other domains, it goes to our friends at GoDaddy or whatever, and we love them. But if you buy a .ca domain name, a good chunk of that cash goes back to the internet community, both through our community investment program, but also in other ways. We do all kinds of work across Canada. We do things like fund a network of IXPs, which stands for Internet Exchange Points across Canada. So that's a big thing that we help to support. So really, when you buy a .ca domain name, you're actually helping fund and support the Canadian ecosystem. So it's something that you can be proud of if your business uses a .ca.
So Spencer, help me out here. I have bought a jellymarketing.ca and I have marketingjam.ca, but I forward both of them to my .com. What do you think about that? Is that okay, or should I be like hosting it on my .ca?
I think in a perfect world, we would say, yeah, you should have as your .ca as your default. But we're realistic. I mean, with the internet is global. So what we generally recommend is what we call brand protection. So if you're a brand that operates in Canada and you feel like you want to have an international presence, it probably doesn't hurt to have a .com or .co or whatever. But you should protect your brand with the .ca as well. Most large organizations do that, but even small ones do it now because it's really important to make sure that you own that exclusive Canadian real estate for your brand. There's lots of large brands that do forwarding. Apple is a good example. They forward apple.ca to apple.com/ca. But there's also examples of huge companies that don't do that. For example, Amazon.ca. not only is it their web address, but if you actually look on the website, they use it in their branding. So it actually says Amazon.ca right in the branding, which goes to show that Amazon has understood that .ca has a value to their Canadian customers. So really, I mean, we don't like to tell any business how to, what's best for them, but we do know that generally speaking, having a .ca, if you're a Canadian business, is the right call, especially from a brand protection perspective, if you think you're going to do something else for your main domain.
Cool. Well, and all of our show is for Canadians, interviewing Canadians, so we should maybe just get that moved over to a .ca and make that the host.
Yeah, you can forward it the other way just as easily.
Nice. There you go. That's awesome. So I need to know, are you a iOS or an Android guy?
I'm very much an iOS guy. Always have been. I'm sort of been big in the Apple ecosystem basically my entire career. Yeah.
And what are some apps that you can't live without, both professionally and personally?
Apps. Well, I mean, I think for me, I consider myself at my core, I'm a writer. So I'm actually a bit of an appaholic. I'm the kind of person who just downloads apps incessantly. Not only that, but I'm happy to pay for them. So that's $5, that's $10, that's $9. Like it's actually pretty sad. So I have a lot of writing, note taking, and kind of like those style of apps. On iOS, one of my favorite note taking apps right now is an app called Bear. Anybody in the iOS ecosystem, you might be aware of it these days. It's a great cross-platform note taking app that has both an iPad, an iPhone, and a Mac version. Really great app. It has support for Markdown, and you can use hashtags, and it's a great sort of all around. It basically replaced Evernote for me for that sort of purpose. Another great app that I use more for long form writing is an iOS app called IA Writer. They're based out of Europe, I think, but it's essentially a no distraction, no frills writing app. They have this really great mode called focus mode. And basically what it does is as you're typing, you can do full screen. And as you're typing, it only shows you the line that you're typing, and every other line is sort of not invisible, but sort of grayed out. It almost acts like a typewriter. So I do personal writing as well, so I really like that style. It's sort of like an old school, almost like Hemingway style typewriter kind of vibe to it. So those are two writing apps that I use quite a bit. What else? I mean, what's really interesting, I actually don't use the default mail app on my iOS devices. I use Microsoft Outlook, which is crazy because most people would think Microsoft Outlook is, like a lot of people have negative connotations when it comes to Microsoft Outlook, but their iOS app is actually phenomenal. I wish they would change their desktop app to be that good. It's great. It has support for so many swipe gestures and all kinds of integrations. So I actually use that to integrate my work email and my personal email and my freelance email all in one email inbox. So that's pretty cool.
Spencer, that's cool. And what about magazines, books, e-newsletters, or like podcasts that you'd suggest to those in marketing?
Wow, in marketing, it's funny. I actually, I do a lot of. I'm a Twitter addict. So a lot of the marketing reading I do comes through my feed. Okay. So you get links and go to different websites. I mean, I tend to stray towards the content marketing and social media side of things. So I love sites like, Buffer has a really great blog. Moz has great stuff, obviously, content marketing front. So I don't really read a lot. Like, I'm not a hardcore reader of specific books or magazines on that front. From a podcast perspective, I'm big on, I like podcasts that kind of broaden my mind a little bit and make me think sort of big picture on things. So, I really like Sam Harris's new podcast that he has right now called Making Sense. It's a really great podcast. I know, some people have different feelings on Sam Harris, but if you just take him for what he's really good at, which is this, broadening your horizons and broadening your mind and thinking of things in different ways and rational thinking, I think it's really great. I think, probably an answer you hear a lot. I really love Gary Vaynerchuk. It's, a guy that successful, it's hard to not take some tips from him. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. And he, there's some things where I think it's not necessarily the right fit, especially for .ca, if you think about his style, right? But he always makes me think, and he's the kind of person that is not afraid to challenge you and challenge the way you think. So I really like his podcast quite a bit. Trying to think of what else I'm doing right now. I'm kind of a voracious reader. I mean, just through through apps like Twitter. Flipboard is actually another great iOS app. Flipboard is great for reading. I like to read all kinds of different things on there. So I don't have as many subscriptions as I used to, mainly because I don't have the time. But I do a lot of my reading through apps like Flipboard.
You mentioned Moz, based out of Seattle. Do you see that having a .ca helps someone with SEO purposes, like showing up higher in Google ranking in Canada?
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of evidence out there that now, I'm sure you know, Google is very close. They're very secretive about what does and doesn't move their algorithm. But there's very clear indications that a .ca domain name does provide SEO benefit in Canada. So if you're a Canadian business and your audience is Canadian and your content is Canadian, then having a .ca domain name is just one extra flag. It's one extra sort of proof point to a search engine to say, this is relevant to this audience. So that's another, I should have mentioned that earlier, that's another strong proof point that we use for .ca as well, is sort of the SEO benefit to that. It's hard to get Google on the record saying that, but there's all kinds of data out there that'll show that pretty conclusively.
What would you say is some of the trends that you're seeing, in the market for marketing in Canada, and maybe some of the things that you're excited about coming up for .ca and some of the things that you'll be doing?
Well, I mean, I guess for marketing in general, like I tend to come at things more from the communication side. I actually went to J school. I started off as a journalist. And so I tend to come at things more from the sort of the content and the storytelling perspective. So I know it's a cliche these days to say storytelling, but it really works. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing, and obviously we see it a lot now through, all the backlash against Facebook and, a little, not as much, but somewhat against like large companies like Amazon and Google, is people are starting to get a little, creeped out about the constant sort of data surveillance that they're under. And there's a little bit of digital ad fatigue happening. And I think that, you look at things like ad blockers and how you can skip it, skipping YouTube ads and things like that. I think there's a fatigue out there amongst consumers. And, whereas, I remember the era where you had to sit through a commercial or go get a snack in order to skip it. Now there's a lot easier ways to skip commercials. And so I think that just makes that fatigue that's going on makes less invasive styles of marketing that much more important. It's where content really thrives. It's where building relationships and audiences really thrives. That doesn't mean there's not a role for things like data and for analytics and making sure that your audience personas are right and that kind of thing. But for me, it's really about, how can you make a connection with your audience and with your consumers or whatever. I think, what's really interesting on that front is, you see a lot of organizations moving all in on content, which is great, right? Like it's awesome. But I think there's a fine line between like, hey, let's pump out, 3 blogs a week and, video, all the things, right? And actually putting out content that has value for your audience, right? And so that's one of the things we're really focusing on at CIRA and with the .ca brand is providing value for our audience. We, in areas where we feel like we, have the most value to give or have the expertise, then we put out that content. But we also partner on content whenever we can. So, you might imagine someone who's buying a .ca domain, a good chunk of them are in the, hey, I want to start a business mentality. So for them, we kind of start, we have sort of almost like a funnel, it's sort of similar to a marketing funnel, but more like sort of a content interest funnel. And that's, at the top of the funnel is, hey, I'm buying a .ca domain name. Great. So what can we teach you about that? Well, we can teach you all about how to choose your name, how to buy your name, how to set up your name, how to forward your how to set up your DNS, how to forward your domain name, all those kind of technical things we can help you with. But then as we move down the funnel, we can say, okay, well, how can we help you with setting up your website? What CMS should you use? Content marketing strategies, social media strategies, things where we feel we have a little bit more expertise and ability to talk about those things. As we move down the funnel, you think to yourself, okay, what other things might this person want to know? Well, they might want to know about finance. They might want to know about trademark law. They might want to know about shipping. Well, we don't really know about those things. So rather than put out a blog where I go and take some content off someone else's website and rewrite it, what we try to do in those cases is do content partnerships, where we bring in either partner organizations or in some cases individuals to do guest blogs or other types of freelance opportunities. Because at the end of the day, we don't have the expertise in something like trademark law, but it's super relevant to, for example, choosing your domain name. When you choose your domain name, you might want to know if the business name that you've registered is already taken, or if someone else has it, and that kind of thing. So how do where is the how can we provide value to that person? Well, in most cases, we don't have the expertise in house, so we then bring it in. So really, it's about knowing what we know and knowing what we don't know, and then knowing what consumers want to know, and then trying to put that all together in something that makes sense for them and can provide them with some value. And the other thing that I think we've started to do, and I think we've started off on a pretty good foot, is just working on our voice and tone. Different organizations have different mandates and have different approaches to things, and that's going to dictate how they talk, both in text and verbally, to their audience. And one of the things we've tried to do is we've tried to embrace a certain voice and tone that we think that is approachable to our buyers, to Canadians. So that is, we try to have a little fun. We try to be whimsical. We try to bring in the Canadiana. Sometimes we're cheesy to a certain extent, but we do it, I think, in a self-aware way where we know that we're being a little bit cheesy and laying it on a little thick. And I think that people appreciate that content. And honestly, our analytics shows that that's the kind of content that works the best, is when we're both giving people value and giving them something that's going to help them get the job done that they're trying to do, but also doing it in a way that's approachable and that's somewhat entertaining. So we're working on how we can roll out more things along those lines this year. We're looking at podcasts. We're looking at more video. We're looking at broadening out our email strategy. So, but really it all stems back to that. How do we provide value to our audience? And how do we do it in a way that's approachable and that has a tone that's going to make it engaging? And awesome. I think that's where the best brands these days are killing it, is when they're able to make that genuine connection.
That's awesome. I saw an article you did with Narcity where you highlighted 10 Canadian businesses who, again, they happen to have .cas, but you highlighted and celebrated 10 amazing entrepreneurs right across the country. I thought that was a great partnership piece with Narcity.
Yeah, Narcity's great. So, our core audience for .ca, like if you were to break down our analytics, is more in like the 30 to 45-year-old range. But we're seeing an evolving audience that's in the younger range, right? And it's not a small, like it's actually starting to approach our core audience. So it's almost like a 1A, 1B situation, at least not now, but pretty soon. And that's where the Narcity partnership comes in. So one of the things we've really seen with .ca, and I don't like to make generalizations, but some of the younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, whatever you want to call them, they're growing up with social media as like a built-in default in their lives. So in many cases, they don't have a website. Like Facebook is their website, Instagram is their website, YouTube is their website. And what we're trying to say to them is, that's great, but you don't own that, right? Yeah. One of the reasons why that Narcity content partnership that you're talking about is specifically around a campaign that we launched last year called Digital Me. The goal of Digital Me is to encourage personal branding and personal domain name usage. But really, it's about taking control of your personal identity online. And so one of our focuses for that campaign is influencers. So we've done a lot of influencer marketing, and you can tell the Narcity pieces we particularly are calling out influencers. But you would be amazed. I've done obviously a lot of research on this because I've been recruiting influencers and that kind of thing. And I'll find influencers with 1 million YouTube subscribes and no website. And it's amazing because you look at these people and clearly they know what they're doing. They've got great business acumen. They're doing really well for themselves. They got brand partnerships, they got swag, they got all kinds of great things going on, but they don't own their own digital presence. And the problem with that is that I'm sure you're aware is that, YouTube can make an algorithm change tomorrow, or can deplatform your video tomorrow, or demonetize it. And all of a sudden your brand is out the window. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to spread the word to digital influencers, to solopreneurs, to individuals, to own their personal domain and website, so that they can have control of their digital identity. Things like, if someone does a Google search for you, what's going to come up, right? Is it going to be your Flickr page from 2008 where you forgot to take down your cat photos? Is it going to be, So the thing that we're really trying to move towards is everyone should own their digital identity. And really, it's never been easier. It's not that expensive. It's, take a few lattes a year less and you can pay for a domain name and a website. And at the end of the day, it's a hugely valuable platform for anyone, not just, I'm sure, you've got your own website. I've got my own website. All us digital marketer people have our own websites, but it's really for everyone, because at the end of the day, when you look at the economy, everything's moving digital. So if you don't have that piece of real estate that's yours, at the end of the day, Facebook or Instagram or YouTube can change your business like that just through a small tweak to their algorithm. And we've seen it happen, right? It's happened a lot.
I bought my son's name, CavemanKovacs.com, but I need to buy my other 3 kids' names. It's a good reminder. I'll do that tonight. I'm gonna close. Go ahead.
I feel bad because I actually haven't bought my kids' damn domains yet, but I
do
need
it tonight.
Yeah, I got to go do that tonight. But that's a really interesting use case that you mentioned there, right? And we've thought about doing that type of marketing. Buy your kid's domain name, almost like a baby gift. That's something that we've definitely explored. But it's hugely important, and it's going to be even more important for your kids and for my kids when they're our age.
Yeah. I want to close with this question. There's a big movement around the world, and especially in Canada here, about buying local, right? You want to know where your vegetables come from. You want to know where your meat comes from, right? Like some people do like the 12-mile diet or there's different terms for it. Yeah. But as a .ca saying, you should buy your domain name locally, is that same for like the email provider that you use? Like, should we all be using Cyber Impact, right? Like kind of Canada's MailChimp, and should we be using Hootsuite, and should we be using Shopify? Is it like, should we be supporting Canada, and why?
I think the short answer is we should try to, as much as possible. We should try to support the Canadian internet. And again, that's one of the reasons why I love working at CIRA, is because not only am I helping people, get online and develop their digital identity, but we give back, as I said, to underprivileged communities and people who are looking for access to the internet. I think there's a larger question here, and we actually talk about this quite a bit at CIRA, is this idea of data sovereignty and network sovereignty. And so, they sound like, the really big words, but really at the end of the day, what it means is, if you can use, obviously there's certain circumstances where the Canadian version is actually the best. You think Shopify is a great example, right? Shopify is the best, so it's not a big deal. Hootsuite, probably the best. There's a lot of competitors in that space, but Hootsuite's really good. There's other areas where it's hard. Like, I would never recommend someone use a lesser tool that doesn't do the job for them just to shop Canadian. But what I would say is that I would, as much as possible, try to choose services that have a Canadian presence. So what I mean by that is, a lot of these cloud service providers, SaaS vendors, a lot of them have no Canadian presence. And so your data is going to Mountain View or going to San Francisco every time, even if you're talking to your buddy across the street. And so you should be trying to find organizations and providers that have Canadian-based servers at the very least. Because not only does it provide you with performance benefits, but it provides jobs for Canadians because now they have to support that. And it has really interesting security and privacy implications, right? If your data is going to the United States, it is subject to the laws of the countries that it enters. So
there ain't no castle law in the U.S.
Exactly. So, you need to be aware of what's going on. And to be fair, a lot of the big players now have Canadian data centers. Amazon does, Microsoft does, Google does, but some of them don't. And if you support a provider that doesn't have a Canadian presence, get on them, call them, or I guess they probably won't answer the phone, email them, tweet them, and say, why don't you have a Canadian server? If my understanding is Dropbox doesn't have a Canadian server. Disappointing. I'd like to see them because I like their service. But Box does. Microsoft 365 OneDrive does. So it's those are opportunities for you to provide, use a service that is at least has a Canadian presence, which protects you and your data. But it also, again, you can, if there's a service you really like, I would contact them and say, hey, well, we would really like you to put a Canadian data presence up here in this country. Because let's face it, I think with everything that's going on in the world right now, Canada is a really strong tech hub right now. There's really no reason for any of these companies to not have a digital presence up here. But yeah, if you can support Canadian, we always would advocate for that. But I think there's certain services where it may be harder than others, and I would try to as much as possible, at least go for data protection, have the network availability in Canada.
I didn't know this, but MailChimp and Constant Contact don't have their contacts stored in Canada. And so some of our clients and people we work with actually by law have to use Cyber Impact because they're the only email tool that has its servers in Canada. And so then I started telling our other clients, because I was like, hey, do you want to have your contacts in the United States, or do you want to have it in the Great White North? And so we've been transferring more of our clients and even ourselves over to Cyber Impact because of that very reason that you've shared here.
Yeah, and it's a big concern. I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot more momentum on this front when you look at what's going on with Facebook and what's going on with PIPEDA here in Canada, is the privacy legislation in Canada, and obviously the EU law that was recently passed as well. These things are starting to become more relevant, and so I think that there's a certain, even though the internet is now 30 years old, as I think that was yesterday, was the 30th anniversary of the web, there's still a lot of ways in which people are still treating it not with the sort of responsibility that you need. And if you're an online-based business, if you collect data, it is your responsibility to make sure that data is protected. And as you said, certain organizations have different standards than others based on whether or not they're government or not. And I know that there's actually some jurisdictions that are considering laws that would say that you can't do business with us unless you have a data presence. So those are the types of things that are coming down the pipe. I mean, the new NAFTA that was passed has some things to say about that. But generally speaking, there are laws that are going to start being put in place that are going to start to require more people to pay more attention to this stuff. So I think that whenever you can, you should be using Canadian services. If you can't, you should be using Canadian hosted services. And if you can't do that, then you should be getting on the phone or on your Slack on their Slack channel or on Twitter and saying, please put a server up here in Canada to support the ecosystem up here.
This is awesome. Everyone, this was Spencer from CIRA, aka .ca. Spencer, you're dropping some great truth bombs here. I have some things to do tonight for my children's domain name protection. Spencer, this is great. And I think marketingjam.ca, I think we're going to switch over to hosting it there because it's for Canadians, by Canadians, interviewing Canadians. So Spencer, really appreciate your time here. This has been a valuable learning time for me, and I'm sure all of our viewers and listeners as well. So much appreciated.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.